So now I'm going to turn to our speaker. I'd like to tell you, or take a few minutes to tell you a bit about Mark Levine. Mark is the Democratic Party nominee for the 45th District of the Virginia House of Delegates. He won a hotly contested primary, but seeing as that he has no opponent in November, he is extremely likely to be his district's next state representative. Although this will be his first elected office, he is no stranger to public office and public issues. He served Congressman Barney Frank as his legislative counsel, and he has been a talk radio host and a television pundit for more than a decade. You may have heard his radio show, The Inside Scoop, or seen him on News Channel 8 or Fox News. With an economics degree from Harvard, a Fulbright scholarship in Switzerland, and a law degree from Yale, Mark began his career as a private trial lawyer, but he quickly took an interest as a citizen activist in constitutional, civil rights, and other policy issues. For example, he was instrumental in drafting Washington's marriage equality law and shepherding it through the legislative and judicial process. But the reason that Mark is here today is because of his dedication to helping survivors of domestic violence. Unlike his other work, Mark did not choose this cause. It came uninvited to his family. In 1996, his sister was murdered by her husband, who was not convicted until 10 years later. His lengthy crusade to get justice for his family and to bring his niece and nephew home from a father who had killed their mother took him to legal battles in Tennessee, Illinois, and Mexico. The legacy of this hard-won fight is a series of laws that Mark wrote and cases that Mark won to help survivors of domestic violence and their children all across the country. He is determined to change public policy so that Virginia families will have the legal protections his sister and her family did not have 10 and 20 years ago. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Levine.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Elizabeth, Sri Mulyani, Sean. It's quite an honor and a privilege to speak here at the World Bank. You folks, for 70 years, have helped billions of people worldwide. Wow. You do every day what I strive to do on my best days, the impossible, and sometimes achieve it. The bank, of course, is trying in 15 years the very modest goals of ending extreme poverty worldwide and helping the poorest 40% of every population of every country on the planet. Okay, not very modest goals. But in the midst of all of this, I was interested to hear Sri Mulyani talk about the GDP cost of domestic violence. But really, when you think about it, your goal of ending poverty is really just to make people better off. Money is some arbitrary unit. Its only value is in people's well-being, in their health care, in their shelter, in food, in education. And part of that well-being is being free from the fear of violence. Now, we all know there's violence worldwide. There's violence on the basis of religion and race and culture and language. A lot of violence localized in various locations. We see it on the news all the time. Domestic violence, unlike that horrific violence, is not on the news very often. It really isn't. And yet domestic violence, unlike the other violence, which is serious and severe and we need to combat, it's in every country on earth. I think it's easy for us to say, oh, well, the developing countries, and we can talk, and we should talk about domestic violence in developing countries. We should talk about cultural misogyny, about the ways that women are kept down in developing countries all over the world. We need to talk about that. But we shouldn't do it with any form of presumptuousness, because it happens right here. It happens in every country on earth. Of course, it happens in the United States. As Sri Mulyani mentioned, 1 out of 5 women in the United States will suffer from either domestic violence or sexual violence in their lifetimes. It doesn't matter if I have a purple band or a green band. It's really all the same as far as I'm concerned. And that means many of you in this room have been the victims, the survivors of violence. I suspect your colleagues don't know that. You tend to know when your mother, your daughter, your wife, when you are the victim of this violence, but your colleagues don't tend to know. You don't tend to know that the woman at the grocery store or the one at the church. I realize it's not just women. It does happen to men. It does happen in same-sex partnerships. But let's be honest here. The vast majority of domestic violence is men against women, and it's as old as humankind. It's existed throughout history. It's existed in every country. So let us not think, if it hasn't happened to you or your family, that's fantastic. But keep your eyes open. I think there's a tendency to think of domestic violence, that happens to people over there. That happens to people in other countries. That happens to poor people. That happens to people of a different race or religion or culture than my own. Doesn't happen in good families. Well, it happened to mine. I come from a very good family. I have wonderful, loving parents. I grew up in an upper middle class background in Nashville, Tennessee. My older sister became an artist. She painted wonderful, colorful paintings and did graphic art and newspapers. As a kid, she kept her nerdy little brother from getting too nerdy. She'd teach me how to dress and teach me the latest pop music, and I was very close to her. In August 1996, my sister was married. She had 2 children. My niece was then 2. My nephew was then 6. And you know what? I meant to time myself, so I didn't go over. I probably should start that. So I will do that now, even. I'll try not to go too far over. My sister was living in Nashville, Tennessee. She had trouble with her husband. She had planned a divorce. She told me in June of 1996 that her husband threatened to kill her. Both of us were very angry by what he said. Neither of us ever thought he would do what he said. But the day before she had an appointment with a divorce attorney on August 16th, 1996, on August 15th, 1996, my sister was never seen again. She went missing, and her husband dropped the kids off at my parents', who took care of them, as they had done for a long time. He had other things to do, I guess, for a month. He had to clean his house. He had to clean his car. In any case, about a month later, he came to my parents' house. He was not happy that we had gone to the police to report my sister being missing. He offered to sell visitation with my niece and nephew to my parents, to give these grandparents access to their grandchildren at a high cost. Literally, he was treating them as hostages. And when they refused to pay the ransom, he skipped town. He ran to Illinois. Now, I come from a family of lawyers. I'm a lawyer. My father's a lawyer. We can go to Illinois. We can hop on a plane. We sued for visitation there. And we took a long time. Grandparents have very few rights in America. It's weird. If a woman actually in the United States has significant rights as long as she's alive. And in fact, if she's injured, if my sister had been injured, probably she could have gotten the kids, escaped, and turned out okay. But since she was murdered, we, the remaining family, her brother, her parents, we were fighting for those kids, and we had very few rights. We were grandparents' uncle. We weren't the parent. The parent was a murderer. In any case, the day we were to get visitation in Illinois, after several years of trying, my former brother-in-law skipped off to Mexico. Now that made things a lot harder. I don't speak Spanish, neither does my family. The Mexican legal system is infinitely different from the Anglo-American system. It's not like learning Illinois law. And Mexico, to be honest, I learned, has a very corrupt and dangerous legal system. My former brother-in-law set up a little bit of a mafia. He became his own sort of warlord down there. He made a lot of money cheating American expats, gringos, usually the elderly, by defrauding them for millions. And he had his own group of bodyguards to stop and intimidate anyone who would try to stop him. There was a sealed indictment for the murder of my sister, but it was sealed. It was sealed. The authorities, I understood why. They didn't want to let him know about the murder indictment because, well, he might escape to a country further away. It took us about a year to navigate the Mexican legal system. It was very hard to do. I think we found the only non-corrupt judge in all of Jalisco, Mexico. She was new, and I don't think it's a coincidence that she was the only woman on the court as well. She enforced the Illinois law, and we brought the children home. But not for long, only for a year. My former brother-in-law, also being an attorney, took us to court. He used the Hague Convention that's supposed to protect against child abduction, and he used it against us. Instead of him having abducted the children of Mexico, a place where they never lived before, none of us had ever lived before, we're not Mexican, he argued that we had abducted the children by bringing them back to the United States. The American courts agreed with him. I have a case from federal district court. We had gotten a wrongful death civil suit against him. Like I said, they couldn't try him for murder because he was in Mexico. Mexico wasn't extraditing him. And in fact, had he come to court to physically present himself in Tennessee to challenge our taking the children, no doubt he would have been arrested and put on trial. No doubt he knew that. He did it all for Mexico. But even though we had proved in civil court that he had murdered my sister, the district court judge scoffed at our, quote, contention, that my parents' contention, that killing their daughter somehow has taken on the dimension of child abuse. The court said, the Levines, my parents, do not allege that this abuse that began in 1990 and ultimately killed her in 1996, they don't allege it took place in front of the children. Instead, they argued the alleged killing of the children's mother has deprived them forever of her love, affection, attention, devotion, and guidance. That's not enough. Apparently, killing the children's mother is not enough. You have to leave her lying bleeding in front of her children for this court to care. The children weren't touched physically. I do remember my nephew searching his kindergarten classroom, refusing to leave the art teacher because he thought that his art teacher might know where my sister, the artist, was. I remember my niece, age 2, asking me if I was her mommy. I finally told my mom, Mom, tell her you're her grandmommy. You're telling her the truth. You're not lying to the child, but you're using this comforting term, mommy. Say you're her grandmommy. And that's what my mom did in the short time in that month that we had them. This court didn't get it. The court found that the husband is desperate and angry, found that he's paranoid, that he shouts at his children, that he's demanding, abusive, and controlling. That's all part of the decision. But that's not child abuse. There were no welts on the children that this court could see. This decision was upheld by the Sixth Circuit. We appealed to the Supreme Court. They didn't hear the case. So a year after my parents brought their children home from Mexico, after we risked our lives, frankly, going down to Mexico in a very dangerous situation, facing people with guns, it's a long story. My parents were ordered by this court to return the kids to the man who killed their mother. One of the saddest days in my life was watching my mother turn over her grandchildren, aged 10 and 6. We were on the tarmac in a Nashville airport, hiding from the press, which covered this case. And my parents believe in following the law, as wrong as it was. They were sent back to Mexico. Now, when you undergo tragedy, I think there's 3 major responses. One is to be just depressed, to be sad, to go into your room and put the covers on, stare at the wall for hours, and retreat from this very unjust world. And that's an understandable response. Another response is anger, destruction. This world is unfair, I'm going to tear it down. And you can understand people who feel that way. My family took the third option, to make things a little better for others. It was too late to save my sister. She was dead. We never thought we'd see the children again. But I marched into I actually went into a Tennessee legislator's office, the guy I represented, state legislator like I'm going to be, in Nashville, and said, "You need to change this law." And he said, "Mark, you're a lawyer. You write me the new law." So I did. Tennessee law said that if you abuse a child, you can lose custody of children. Well, that makes sense. We don't want people who abuse children to have custody of children. But if you abuse your wife, or your husband, or your girlfriend, or your mistress, or whomever, if you would abuse an adult, if you kill your wife, well, no harm to children. Didn't happen in front of the children. It wasn't in the law. The law said if you abuse children, you're a child abuser. If you kill their mother, that's not abuse. So I went to this legislator and I said, "Do you think that's abuse?" He said, "Yeah, I think that's abuse." I went to Republicans and Democrats. I went to the House and the Senate. And in a very sharply partisan atmosphere, I'm proud to say that every Democrat and every Republican in a Democratic-controlled branch of one branch of the legislature, Republicans controlled the other branch, the governor was Republican, I'm a Democrat, didn't matter, unanimously, Tennessee passed a new law. Today, the law in Tennessee is if you abuse anyone in your household, you can and should lose custody of your children. Think about why this is so important. If you ask a victim of domestic violence, and I'll say her, although I recognize that there are some men, but 95% in the case of the World Bank is women, I'm confident it's over 90%. If you ask a victim of domestic violence why she stays, some people think, why does she stay? She knows he's violent, and they put the blame on the victim. These women will tell you, particularly if they have children, yeah, I knew he was violent. Yeah, I knew he was dangerous. My kids were there. Laws often didn't protect the children. And I was willing to risk my life to help them save theirs. That's an understandable response from a mother. That's, I think, why my sister stayed so long. This law in Tennessee, and one that I plan to pass, a similar one in Virginia, yeah, I'm a partisan Democrat, but I think Republicans can agree that domestic violence is wrong, and that if you murder or abuse anyone, you're not a good parent. 5 years or so after we thought we'd never see the kids again, the Mexican people had enough. They rose up against my former brother-in-law. He had cheated and harmed so many of them that they formed a protest group against him. They put posters all around their little town. They pressured their legislators. The Mexican people of Ajijic kicked my brother-in-law out. Mexico expelled him. They didn't extradite him for the murder conviction that the Mexican government knew about, the sealed. No, they just expelled him. They had enough of him. He was harming too many of the Mexican people. Good for them. They helped me. I helped others. They helped me. They helped my family. As soon as he arrived in the United States, he was put in jail. He then hired a hitman to kill my parents. Nice guy. And in August of 2006, 10 years after my sister was missing, my former brother-in-law was convicted and sentenced to 56 years in prison. He's currently in a Tennessee penitentiary. The children came home to my parents. I won't go into the details of their scars. I will save that privacy for them. I will tell you that I told you my parents were great parents. They took them in, and 10 years later, my nephew has graduated college. He is working as an engineer, doing fantastic things. I'll brag a little. He has a patent to use an iPhone to use ultrasound waves to cure eye disease. Yeah, I couldn't do anything like that. Very impressive. My niece, who is younger, is studying to become a nurse. Interesting that the fields they want are to help others. But the scars remain. The scars remain. And as I talk about their privacy, I'm immediately, anytime I talk about this, there's always a balancing act. I don't want to invade their privacy. Their acquaintances don't know that their father killed their mother. Their friends know. It's not their fault at all, but it's a burden that they will carry for the rest of their lives. When I first ran for office, this is my second try, I didn't win my first try, ran for Congress. I didn't initially talk about my background. I got to tell you, plenty of people that knew me, my close friends knew, but my acquaintances, the people I worked with, the people in Barney Frank's office, they didn't know that my sister had been murdered by her husband. It was all over the news in Nashville. You can Google it and read about it all you want. They didn't know. I didn't tell them. I guess my thought was it was none of their business. When I ran for office, I ran on all these other things I'd done. Didn't talk about it. Until an acquaintance of mine, not a close friend, but a good acquaintance of mine, someone I'd known for 10 years, we went to dinner, and she told me how she had been sexually abused by a family member. And I didn't know that. I'd known her for 10 years. I didn't know that. And she reminded me that this is widespread, that I knew that this does happen in all families. It's not just the developing world. It's not just lower income people. It's everywhere. And we talked about a couple people who just run for office. Well, Carolyn McCarthy ran a few years back. You may remember her. Her husband was murdered on the Long Island Railroad. And she ran for office talking about gun regulation. Just recently, Cree Deeds, Virginia legislator, his son almost killed him, did kill himself, had mental illness. Cree had tried to get his son into a hospital, but there weren't enough beds available. Now, Cree could have taken that private tragedy, that horrible tragedy, he loved his son very much, and left it private. But he went public about it because he knew we needed more help for people who suffer from mental illness. So my friend said to me, do I want to see measures like the ones I took in Tennessee worldwide? I said, damn right I do. She said, so why won't you talk about it? I said, well, people may think I'm exploiting it to get elected. She said, do you think Cree Deeds was exploiting his son? Do I think Carolyn McCarthy was exploiting her husband? I said, no, I think they were brave people. And she looked at me and I knew exactly what she meant. And so I started talking about it a lot. Talked about it all during my last race. Indeed, I was the only candidate, and I don't mean to disrespect the other four who ran, but I was the only candidate that mentioned domestic violence, sexual violence. It's 1 in 5 women in the United States. So I'm going to encourage, and it's a personal decision for everyone, I'm going to encourage everyone to come out. I'm a gay man. I can tell you that coming out has done a world of difference for gay equality worldwide. When we were in the closet, no one knew we existed, and very little was done, and there were legal and social prejudices. There's still tremendous legal and social prejudices against the LGBT community. But coming out has definitely led to our strength. Look at just the transgender movement from Caitlyn Jenner as one example that just happened. You know one person in this situation, you have compassion for all. So if you have been a victim of domestic violence, or sexual violence, or your sister or wife or daughter or husband, son or brother or cousin or friend, and you have permission to talk about it, please talk about it. It's not on the news. We're watching violence abroad, and we're not watching the violence that occurs right here at home and in every country on earth. 1 out of 5 American women, I don't know the statistics worldwide, but please don't think it couldn't happen to you. I didn't think it could happen to my family, but it did. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
I'm not sure what to say. That was astonishing. Thank you. Fortunately, I don't have to, because we have a panel here today that are going to discuss this issue in a lot more detail.